We are here to have our final session for today with Brian Frank, who is an SF State alum and award-winning photographer, whose images have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Harper's Magazine, The Atlantic, Newsweek, Time, Le Monde, pardon my French, American Photo, the New York Times, and many others. Brian is a 2017 Catchlight Fellow and the recipient of the POI Global Vision Award, among others. His photographs are included in the permanent collection at the United States Library of Congress. So we're very lucky today to end our formal sessions with Brian Frank. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you.
How are you all doing? I know it's been a long day.
We're good.
Thank you for having me here. I wanted to just kind of jump into some work that I did over the last few years with the help of the Pulitzer Center. So one of the main things that the Pulitzer Center likes to focus on is underreported stories. By the way, this is all work that I have been taking to classrooms around Chicago with the help of the Pulitzer Center, and also doing some work in my hometown of San Francisco. So, you know, I like to ask students what is an underreported story and kind of get some, what do they think that means, and also relate that back to their own communities, and what are the stories that are reported out of their communities versus the things that should be reported. You know, things that come out are often negative, and there's a lot of positive things going on. When it comes to California, you know, I think we all have images when we think of California, and this comes from the media, right? And so the very first time I came out here, actually, it was during wildfires in California. And so one thing I spoke with the students about was like, what do you think of when you think of California? They say, oh, the fires, wildfires. Well, I think a lot of people are actually surprised to find that, you know, it's not just firemen out there fighting these wildfires that are affecting our communities in the West, but there's actually a very large percentage, actually 40% of the firefighters fighting those fires are inmates. And so it's actually prison labor, okay? So that is a kind of a textbook example of an underreported story, and this is something that, you know, all of the media attention focuses on images of firemen putting out fire and being heroes, when actually, you know, there's a large percentage of these guys that are inmate firefighters. These are inmate firefighters on the fire line heading out into the brush. So another thing that is typically shown visually is going to be, you know, the firefighter with the fire hose, the flames, all of that, right? But the reality of it is, and this is all learning for me as I'm doing these stories as well, but you know, the reality of it is that a large percentage of this type of firefighting is actually done through sheer brute force, okay? So you have guys like, you know, these inmates here who are using archaic hand tools, and they are cutting lines through the brush in order for that last moment when the hoses get to come in, and that's when the cameras show up, okay? And you can kind of see just the exhaustion on the faces. Sorry, it's a little bit dark, but you know, this is kind of, it's a very manual task. So these fires are actually fought with, you know, there will be one guy with a power tool like a chainsaw, and 4 or 5 guys with shovels and hand tools. So now, and a question people often ask is, well, why would anyone do this? Is it because of pay? Of course not. It's not pay. The state saves hundreds of millions of dollars on this. These guys do get paid. They get paid about $1 an hour for their time on the fire line, and this is work that is a risk to their lives. Last year, I believe we lost 4 inmate firefighters last year. So these guys die. And you know, you only hear about the deaths, but I've never seen studies, and I don't know that any studies have been done, but I have personally seen some catastrophic injury to a lot of these guys, and they don't get health care barely at all, because they get prison health care, and it ain't the best. So this is a crew kind of taking a break. And even when they're taking a break, they're clearing out a space of fire to take a break. So the men actually sleep out on the fire line. So what they do is they fight fire for about 24 hours. and then they get to take a break. And a lot of times that break will mean clearing an area to sleep, and they'll get as close back to their area of resupply as possible, and then they will bunk down in an area like this. Okay. So this is an inmate that is passed out after working all day, or at least trying to pass out. So you see how these are kind of not your typical images about firefighting, right? I mean, that's kind of the main point that I try to drive home with folks, is that, you know, our consciousness gets really developed by the images that we see in the media, and unless we know, and this is, again, 40% of the reality of what's happening, and it's just not shown at all. Now, with all of these stories, like for instance, with all the stories that I like to do as a long-form documentary photographer, I like to peel back the different layers of a story and try to go deeper and deeper. You will see some images of inmate firefighters in the media occasionally, but you very rarely will see images from inside of the camps themselves. That's because, generally speaking, the prison authority doesn't see any benefit to letting those images out there, so it's hard to get access to that sort of thing. But you know, through the help of being able to take this story on over a long period of time, I got to peel back many layers. So now we're going to go into one of the camps themselves. One of the things that I really aim to do with this work is not only to shed some light on some of these interesting facts that people don't know about, but also just kind of show these folks as human beings. And that's really the goal, because another layer of misinformation that we all have in our heads is like, what does it mean to be a prisoner or an inmate? And I think that folks get dehumanized in general when we start thinking about the images of inmates or prisoners. But really, you know, they're folks just like, a lot of these folks are just folks like you and me, with families coming out of bad situations, and they end up in these camps. This is what's called the Latino TV Room. So there is still old school segregation in most of these camps. There's a Latino room, a black room, and a white room. And so, you know, it's important for me as a journalist to show these things, because if you ask for an official statement, these types of things don't exist anymore in these facilities. Inmates are given more downtime than your traditional inmate would have. So at these camps, that's one of the main benefits, is that they're kind of given a little bit more freedom than you would get if you were to be in a traditional facility. And that's kind of how they sell the program to inmates to get them to be in here. They have to stay ready at all times. That's why these guys are wearing their boots even though they're sleeping. And the other way that they sell this program, the real way they sell it, is you get an increased amount of what are called Goodtime Credits. So for every day that you are actually on a fire line, you're given 2 days off of your sentence. So that's the real way that they incentivize this program, is to get people a way to get out quick. And then the other thing that they do is incentivize them by providing incentives for manual labor. So that's what this is kind of representing visually. This guy is doing different types of cleanup around the camp in order to try to get a sentence shortened. Again, going behind the scenes in these places is my job, and it's something that I try to teach to students if they want to really get into storytelling. This is an area, you know, when I'm making these images in the camp, I have a minder that is following me. It's very, very difficult working condition because it's hard to get real moments. So this is actually a moment where I slipped my minder. I got away from them and was able to get into a cell. They basically are, you know, they are afraid for my safety, supposedly, but they just don't want you photographing in these spaces. So this is me in a cell with one of these guys. But to me, it's important, again, to do that because, again, I want to show these guys as human beings. They're, you know, if I only get to do it from a distance, there's no way to relate to them at all. It turned out this guy actually knew some people I knew, and we had a nice, friendly conversation. These guys do get opportunity for education while they are in this camp, which many of them do take. So this is studying for a GED, I believe. And these are the types of things that they actually want you to photograph for, when I'm in these places, because they do like to show that these guys get an opportunity at education in there. And when I show this to younger students, they kind of, I'm like, what are those things, And they're like, payphones. The only place that you see payphones these days is in jail, more or less. And yeah, so phones are used as a primary incentive to coerce good behavior. And that's because it's the sole connection with the outside world. So that's like your main currency really is your phone time. And and by the way, I've been saying men, but actually women do this too, so I don't want you to think it's all men that do this. I've only photographed the men, but men of all ages are doing this. This is an old timer in the front row right here, and it's men, from their, late teens all the way into their 60s. So peeling back another layer of this story, when I was initially working in that first camp, I discovered that there actually is one camp left in California, which is actually a juvenile camp. Okay, so this is, there used to be, as I researched, I found that there were only a few years back, there were 10 youth camps, and I think no one will give me a straight answer, but I think it's just kind of a politically untenable idea to have juvenile camps because this is dangerous work. But I really wanted to see what the final juvenile camp was all about. So now we're going to go and kind of look at what one of these juvenile camps looks like. So one of the things that you can notice here is that there isn't any barbed wire or razor wire or any of the traditional things that we think about when we are thinking prisons. The reason for that is because they have placed these camps out in the wilderness. Okay, so it's kind of like when you think of the old gulags, right? Like if they used to put people out in Siberia, there's nowhere to go. So there's been very few instances where people have tried to escape, and there's no instances where they have been able to last more than 2 or 3 days out in the forest anyways. So you don't really have to have razor wire. So the out of bounds sign is that's as far as you're allowed to go. So these are some of the boys of Pine Grove here. So when I got to Pine Grove, there were 90 inmates. 4 of them were Caucasian. Kind of gives you an idea. It was all Black and Latino, and that's kind of who we're locking up in this country. So it's kind of a microcosm of that. And these kids are they all committed violations on average between around 14, 15 years old. And then when they hit 18, they became eligible for this camp. So all these guys most of them are 18. You can be up to 24 and still be in this camp. And still be under the jurisdiction of the juvenile justice system. Most of these guys are 18, 19 years old. This is coming back in from a day in the field, and they're getting searched as they come back in for contraband. So this is Tapia. Marcus is his first name. So when I was spending time in these facilities, one of the places that I would always kind of hang around with my camera was the telephones, okay? And the reason for that is because I actually was formerly incarcerated myself. And one of the memories that I can't wipe out of my mind is actually the times that I would call my mom, because that was always a really emotional thing for me, and it's something I still to this day can't really shake. So, through photojournalism, I'm able to tell that story to all of you and share it with students. And it's through my story, and it's through Marcus's story. And that's kind of and this is what Marcus is doing right here. He's calling his mom. So it was something that was very familiar to me. Now I think that to me, is one of the real powers of the arts, okay? What I'm doing here is journalism, but photography blends in the arts. And why do I say it's an art? It's because it is a universal language. It's something that no matter what your background, no matter what language you speak, it's something that can elicit an emotion in somebody. And I think that's the real power of what we do here with this type of medium. Small items like this kind of, tell us more about these guys. And they're not allowed to bring anything from home, and so they're only allowed to bring small religious items in. So again, a lot of the images that we see out of prison are not like this, right? And to me, like, I mean, here you have three guys from three different racial backgrounds, three different neighborhoods that beef with each other on the outside. They like lots of these guys would say that they had never actually had a friend from another ethnic racial background before they went to prison, which is an interesting thought. But this is a place actually some of these guys find brotherhood. And that's a sad thought that they have to be in jail to find that is kind of a scary thing to me and says a lot about our society in general. This is the workout room. In prisons across California, they have eliminated all of the workout facilities, but they let the guys that are on work crews still have workout facilities so they can be in peak physical condition. And they work out all day, not just when they're in the provided gym, but also during count. Like right here, this is the time when the guards come around to make sure no one has escaped, and they do that every hour. So why are people in this facility? And these are all things that I only really learned by being there and asking questions. What I found is the pattern is almost universally, these guys are all locked up on gang-enhanced charges. So these are, say you are someone who committed an assault. That could be a fight, just like many 15-year-olds get in. But if you come from a place that's considered a gang neighborhood, you have a high likelihood of getting what's called a gang-enhanced charge. So that assault, which maybe could have carried probation, can now carry a 4-year sentence because it's considered a gang assault. So now what neighborhoods are considered gang neighborhoods? Neighborhoods of color across the board, disproportionately, extremely disproportionately. So you can have people that come from neighborhoods that are not neighborhoods of color committing the same crime, someone coming from a neighborhood that is a neighborhood of color, and one person gets a 5-year sentence and one person gets a slap on the wrist. And that's kind of how this criminal justice system works. And that's why you end up with mostly black and brown boys in these places. Now, a lot of these, I would say half of the guys that I work with were gang involved. So I don't want you to think that none of them are gang banging, because lots of them were. Lots of them are not gang involved, and they still end up here. A lot of that has to do with, do you have ink? Like Tecum here, he has ink on him, and he is not gang involved. But he had ink, and he's from a place that's considered a gang neighborhood, and he caught a gang charge. And several of the guys I work with, that's the same story. Family members that are gang involved, and they get considered gang involved, and that's just how it works. So again, kind of like humanizing these guys is important to me. This is one of my favorite photos to show to kids. I'm usually like, well, what do you think that he did with this turtle? And universally, the first answer is he ate it. But that's not the case. He also did not keep it as a pet. He didn't kill it. He went as far as he was allowed to go, out to one of those out-of-bounds signs, and released it. And the reason for that is because he wanted it to be free, and like he himself wasn't. I just think that is, something important to know. A lot of these guys also have never been in nature. They all, it's almost all inner city kids. And so this is the first time that they're seeing like wildlife of any sort. So one of the important things to know about these camps is also the connection to history, okay? So I like to ask my students about what they know about what it means to, what was a chain gang, okay? Like what does that mean, and what are the images that you think of when you think of a chain gang? And chain gangs were actually created in mass post-slavery, and people of color were funneled into chain gangs to build roads across the nation. Those roads came westward and ended in camps that they built, and they kept these camps there, which eventually became fire camps. So there's a direct historical line from slavery into chain gangs into the very camps that we're looking at right here. So, and one of the other things, another layer of this story is that, we've been talking about these guys a lot like it's inmate firefighting, because that's how it's branded, but the vast majority of the work that these guys do is still road work, okay? So that's actually what these guys are going out to do right here. So most of the year they work the roads. And when they're working the roads, they actually don't get that $1 an hour. They actually get about $1 a day when they're working road. So this is Kane, and this is actually, Kane has become a good friend of mine. And this is the last day of Kane's incarceration. He's been locked up since he was 14. He did more than 4 years. He's 18 here, going on 19. One of the things, this was like a happy moment for Kane. But one of the things to know about Kane is he's super excited at this moment. He's about to finally get out and see his family, but he's been given no education about what it's going to mean to be on probation or parole. And the vast majority of people getting reincarcerated in our society, coming out of jail, are going back on probation and parole violations, okay? And the majority of those are what we call technical violations. So this is like missing a parole appointment, missing curfew. It's not actually it's not committing a new crime. So Kane, he's super psyched here, and I was like, well, I tried to ask him, like, well, what's it gonna mean to, like, to be on curfew? And he's just like, well, what's curfew? He literally doesn't know. So shortly after getting released, he was out for a few months. I kept working with him. He missed a parole appointment, and they locked him back up in county jail where he was put in a gang pod because he's considered a gang member. Kane's not a gang member. I know him well. His brother is a gang member, but he's not, but he's considered one. So he got put in the gang pod, got jumped by 5 guys, beat up one of the 5 guys that jumped him and got hurt himself, and they gave him a 6-year felony charge. Okay, so that all stems from missing a parole appointment, right, and defending himself. I was able to petition the court in Kane's case and get his sentence suspended. He's out right now on a suspended sentence, meaning that if he does anything, he will go to jail for 6 years. But most people don't have someone to petition the court. So this is how the system's set up, and this is why, probation and parole reform is really a big place to start if we're going to address these issues. This is Tapia, who I thought wouldn't do well. This was when he first got into this camp, and he very much was, he was very aware of he's a really smart kid, and he was aware of kind of the historical links to slavery of being in a labor camp, and he thought it was ridiculous to be asked to nicely fold an American flag, so that's why he has it crumpled up in his arms. He actually is doing well though, now, he's out. So this was after there was a big fight at the camp. And I have to be honest about these places, and they can be dangerous places. I returned back to this place, and there had been a huge brawl that went down. And out of the 90 guys that were originally there, this is what was left. So everyone got what's called rolled up, so they got sent to maximum security facilities, all of them. And these guys, almost all these guys to a T were really short timers, and so when this fight happened, they just hid at their bunks. But what they're doing here is they're breaking down the new work assignment for these guys, and that's why they're all just kind of jaded, okay, you're telling us now what kind of work we're gonna do. And so this is Sala. Sala taught me a lot about the criminal justice system, almost more than anyone, except Kane. So Sala's story is that, right here, what he's doing right here is he's not being allowed to work out with the other guys, and that was because they use that as a punishment. They'll say you have no credit to work out. So then he has to be outside and work out alone. So the reason for that was, and I started piecing all this together from talking to deputies, talking to Sala, talking to other guys. He was coming up on release, and he doesn't look very happy about that, right? So I was like, well, I don't get it. He's about to get out, and he kept violating on small infractions as he was getting close to release. So then finally one of the deputies, who was this real sweet lady, and she really cared about these boys, she was off the record kind of discussion with me, and she's like, a lot of these guys, when they're about to get out, that's when they start acting up and violating, okay? The reason for that is because they have nowhere to go. It's just that simple. So someone like Sala, he's been locked up for, I think he at this point he'd been locked up for 5 or 6 years. He never really was given any skills to be a man on the outside world. It's totally terrifying for him. He's about to get out, nowhere to go. He's going to get dumped out there. And that is even scarier than jail to him. Shortly after this, he left out some contraband open in his, they always hide their contraband, so there's no reason to leave it out. He left it out for a guard to find and violated and got sent back up to the regular facility. And I've tried to track him down, but there's no finding him currently. This is one of my last nights at the camp, and it was pouring rain, and the guys all wanted to play football, and that was like something that kind of wasn't allowed, except since there was a journalist there, they kind of let the guys do it. And sometimes it's like small victories that we can take, even though technically as journalists we're not supposed to affect the situations. I still was happy that they did that for these guys because I was there. So another layer of this thing, after I was, spending time in this camp, and what I try to do as a journalist is focus on patterns. Why are all these guys locked up? But also, like, where did they come from? How did they get here? And one of the consistent themes was guys from the Central Valley of California. So I wanted to go there and see what this was about. And as I started studying a little bit about the Central Valley, it's what we're looking at here is this is an irrigation ditch running through what's called gang territory. But why is there an irrigation ditch? This is the breadbasket of the nation. This is a large percentage of all the food, vegetables, fruits that we eat comes from right here. So historically, this whole area, so you have nowadays it's all Latino folks, right? It's all migrant workers that come to this area to work en masse. They're completely politically disenfranchised. They can't vote, nothing like that, right? Well, they have kids, and their kids don't want to do that work. Okay, and you end up with these urban centers that have no opportunity other than field work. So that's how you have this kind of disenfranchised generation, okay? Not only that, recently I was actually talking to a writer about this, and he told me some new information about that I just hadn't been aware of, because I was like, well, how did the black folks get here? Because it's all Latino and all black. They were actually brought to this area to work these farms post-slavery, which I didn't know that either. So you see the historical connections throughout time to these kind of historically repressive systems. And these urban centers still have no opportunity, and you end up with kids that have no opportunity, and you end up with gang neighborhoods and kids going to jail en masse, right? So this is, out on the street, and this is basically as the gang unit is patrolling a neighborhood, the guys that are out on the street, some of whom are in gangs, like these guys, they all kind of are like taken off because the gang unit's coming. So the gang unit is given kind of carte blanche to aggressively patrol. So they are basically a military unit. They're a tactical unit, heavily armed, and they patrol in sweeps like you would in any like conflict area. So they're coming through right now, and they already grabbed up a couple guys, and the other guys are running for it. But one of the things I learned from working with the gang unit, because they basically, their whole thing was like, oh, we just take down the big hitters, we just like go after these hardcore gangbangers. What we actually did the whole time was chase around school children, basically. Because it was all 14, 15-year-old kids. So this is a 15-year-old kid in a police car. Now these guys are so scared. This kid's not a gang member. They're terrified of the gang unit. So when the gang unit's coming, everyone runs for it. These guys took off, foot chase, and I'm like, this is how people get shot. Because like I'm running around back alleys with these cops. These kids didn't do anything except they had like a couple 40s, okay? Like that's it. But now someone might get killed because we're running around back alleys. Everyone has their guns out. I almost got shot on this foot chase. I came this close to getting shot. And you can just see how these things escalate out of nothing. This is the head of the gang unit the first time I started spending time with them, Paul Cervantes. He was, after I worked with them for a while, so Paul Sergeant Cervantes, he used to talk about how the gang unit was the toughest gang in town. That was how he wanted to be seen. He was very proud of that. They basically, so shortly after this, there was a huge scandal. Cervantes got removed from the squad and charged with several charges, corruption charges. They were taking cars from drug dealers and driving him around town, and they got charged with auto theft, corruption, several other charges, which like kind of scandalized the Fresno PD. But it gives you an idea of the culture of what's going on here, right? Now, what do we think Cervantes is doing these days? Any ideas? He's training the next generation of gang unit task force. That's how it got squashed in the media. So, you know, and it was funny because my dad is a paramedic firefighter. He's very familiar with kind of this like culture, right? And I didn't even tell him. I was talking to him about Cervantes. I was like, yeah, and he's like, he got promoted, didn't he? Without me telling him. And I was like, yeah, he's actually running the school. And he's like, that's how it goes. It's too much. It's way bigger of a stink to fire this guy and have him in the media making a stink than it is to actually promote him. So interaction of police with children is something I saw over and over and over and over all day. And I think it's important to recognize that these perceptions of power start at a very young age, okay? And this little girl is showing that she's 3 to the new sergeant of the gang squad as the unit does a sweep of her house. So if anyone is on probation or parole in any of these homes, the police can legally search and seize on the property. So you have a whole family. There's one boy in the house who is on probation or parole. The cops go, let's see, who's nearby that's on probation or parole? This kid. We don't like him. Let's go to his house. And then they sweep the house and toss everything, and right? And then you have the whole family getting subjected to this, the next generation, right? Kid's not even there. He was probably out playing with his friends or something. But this is how these things get perpetuated. I remember when I was very young, I remember the few instances that we had run-ins with the police. When with my dad getting bullied, etc. And like, those are memories that stick in my head even if I was 3 years old, because it's like, and those are things that form how I see power in society around me. And so, that's kind of what I'm trying to get across here. And this was actually, this was an image that I recently became a new father myself. And this was an image that, I was basically trying not to cry taking this image. Like, it's really hard for me to shoot this. But I just thought that it was really important that I showed it. This is like, again, no child should ever be subjected to having his mom on the ground like that, and having floodlights on her, etc. Now, one of the things that happened here after I shot this photo, and one of the interesting things, this was one of the very, very rare times that I shot a photo where the subject didn't want me to shoot the photo. Almost all these folks, they let me photograph them in all these situations. She was not happy I was taking her picture. I had to make an ethical decision, and I just felt it was that important that I had to shoot the photo anyways. But the interesting thing, besides that, is that, so she was angry at me for taking this photo. But right after this, what the police do, they lined her up against that garage door, and they photographed her for Facebook, okay? So then they put out her mugshot on Facebook as like a public shaming, okay? And that's something that they do often. And so she's supposed to be innocent until considered guilty, right? We would like to think. But now she's guilty, 100%. Like, and she has pictures in cuffs on Facebook all over her mugshot all over the internet. In this particular instance, one of the interesting things that happened was, even though the idea was to publicly shame her, she actually ended up getting several modeling contracts when she got out for a few tattoo magazines and local tattoo parlors, believe it or not. Her photo went viral because of and she had people trying to post her bail, and all this stuff happened, which was kind of crazy. Again, it shows you some stuff about our world we live in. Yeah. Not illegal. She's on public, so if you are for instance, me as a journalist, if you are viewable from a public space, I can legally photograph you. So the cops know that, right? So they'll take someone out to public space and photograph them. And there is no law against that. I think that, I hope that is something that would change. Currently, they're not breaking the law. So something, to go further on the social media point, so that's one way that social media is weaponized, right? And then another way that it's used heavily, and I had no idea about this, was that it's one of the main tools of law enforcement. So, there was one of these guys is someone that of interest to the police. They have a specific officer whose job it is to scour social media. That's what she does. So she sets up fake accounts and friends people of interest to the police. Okay, they'll do like a pretty girl so that one of these guys will like agree and say, oh yeah, sure, you can be my friend, and then they follow their social media accounts. So then when they decided that they wanted to go get one of these kids, they basically figured out where he was off of social media, and they didn't even have to have his social media at that point because they were also friends with all of his friends. So they saw there was a party at this place, and they were like, okay, well, we know where he is. Here, they just posted 30 minutes ago. They're over at this apartment. We know what building that's in because all those apartments look a certain way. So we went over there, and they got the guy and dragged him out. That was news to me. I didn't realize that it was used that way. But as a journalist, I think that is a very weird and gray area. I don't know that should be okay. But we do have to be honest. And the fact of the matter is that these cops did pull a bunch of firearms out based on that. So I don't want to create this misconception that like all these guys are angels, because there is serious gun violence going on in these places, and the cops are doing some crazy stuff sometimes, which shouldn't be legal. Lots of it. And the way that they justify it is that they say, well, but we got these bullets and guns off the street, okay? So that's the reality. This was hundreds of .40 caliber rounds that were pulled out of the car in front of this place, and there were 2 pistols in the car as well. And these are all kids. So one of the other things that the police do, is they do try to do some social outreach in these places when they can. So it's not all breaking in doors, etc. They are arresting someone in front of this house, and this is dual purpose. One thing is they're trying to reach out to this kid because this kid is the age where you end up caught up. Okay, it's generally 14, 15-year-olds. They're also getting information out of them too, but they are trying to do some outreach and be like, hey man, like we don't want you to end up like this. He doesn't have any gang affiliation. And they just want him to stay that way, and they're trying to kind of befriend the community a little bit. And meanwhile, like one of the interesting things to me was as that arrest was going on, is life just went on as normal right out front, because it's a very just common everyday thing. So one of the the big problems and one of the root causes of all this, I think, is just really this culture that glorifies violence, right? This is actually when I went with Kane, who we spoke about, who was incarcerated, got out, got locked back up. So when he was out, one of the very first places that we visited was the cemetery, where he had 4 of his friends that were murdered in the 4 years that he was locked up. All of them under 18. And so we're there, and he's kind of mourning, and we're visiting gravestones, and then one of his friends comes up, and he's like, check out my new ink, and it's Scarface with a machine gun, which I just thought was very ironic considering what it was that we were there doing, is literally visiting people that were murdered. So that reality of gun violence is something that we really need to pay attention to. And this is Zariq. Zariq was a victim of gun violence, okay? There's a lot of tragic things about the story of Zariq, many, many tragic things. He was on the steps of the church where he was in the choir. His father was the pastor, and he caught a stray bullet to the head. He was with his girlfriend. They were about to go to Black History Month celebration. Pillar of the community, honestly. But how did I get access to make this picture? Now, all of those things I just told you are tragic about what happened to Zariq. But as a professional, to me, one of the most tragic things was his depiction in the media. So because Zariq was in a gang neighborhood and got shot, automatically the story was gang member gets shot. Automatically. The police assumed he was a gang member, released a press release, the newspaper picked it up, and it didn't do any reporting on it. And and I try to think about what are the reasons for that. I mean, really, media is not getting funded to the point where they can look into any of this stuff anymore. The newspapers run in a skeleton crew, and they just take whatever the officials say and they run it, right? So, because I was working on this story with the Pulitzer Center and with other organizations, I was able to just do one simple thing, and that was ask his family about him. The fact that I asked that simple question, can you tell me a little bit about him, meant that they let me into this very intimate space in order to share the real story of Zariq. This was as Zariq died, actually. When I was leaving the hospital, it was a flock of birds kind of took off, and I was pretty sad, and I photographed it. So no media was allowed anywhere near the church for Zariq's funeral, and that's because the community now lost all faith in the media, and they lost all faith in the police. But they let me be there to photograph this moment. His family was a veteran family, and given the circumstances around the murder, this should have been a national story. But no one would pick any of this up because it's just another black kid killed in a gang neighborhood. His family asked me to make a happy image from the ceremony, and I just wanted to show kind of some of the strength of the community, and I tried to focus on that when I was making this image, just to show the positive, the positive emotions that Zariq left behind in his community. So I want to move on to a workshop that I did. After I'm still working on this project, so I don't want to say completed, but when I moved on a little bit, it was important for me to take some of this work and start doing some education with it. One of the ways that I was doing that is with a grant from the Pulitzer Center to do a storytelling workshop. So we went to San Francisco State, which is my alma mater, and they have an organization there that helps folks that are getting out of jail matriculate into college and kind of set higher goals for themselves other than, because generally speaking, these guys, it's like, oh, get a high school degree or GED or something, you're never going to go to college. But trying to make these guys aware that they can go to college and can set higher goals and that it's achievable. So this is Eugene, and he actually, he's someone who was formerly incarcerated and is one of the most talented, artistic people I've ever met in my life. I mean, this guy, he's a classically trained violin player. You could give him a paintbrush and he will paint something that'll blow your mind. I mean, he's just one of these like mind-blowingly intelligent people, but he learns in a different way than he's ever been taught. So like, he's a visual learner. He's someone that learns visually. He's someone that if you communicate with him in a different way than that's outside of the traditional box, you can get through to him and you can really, he wants to learn. So photography was a natural fit for this kid, So Eugene, this was, what we did is we focused on how to kind of like reset some of the narratives about their communities and also just how to use a camera as a tool. This is Eugene's work, by the way. We're just gonna look at some student work now. How to use the camera as a tool to communicate. And so, can anyone here tell me what this photograph means to Eugene? Think about some of the symbolism, right? We're thinking conceptually. And so like, images don't have to be literal. The goal is to elicit, the goal is emotion, okay? So what are some of the symbols that you're seeing and what could they mean? What he meant was the slipping, right? With the banana peel, that's actually what he's trying to communicate. And the bird is freedom. So the way that Eugene explains this image is that what it means is that it's really easy for him to slip up and lose his freedom, okay? So that's kind of the power, to me, that's the power of this medium in a nutshell. Eugene can communicate things to people with an image, right, that maybe like don't speak his language, you know what I'm saying? And so, and I've had, like, when I show this to students, like, you'd be amazed, they really get it, like, really quick. Because they are used to, like, a lot of these kids are used to thinking in these terms, actually. So, Eugene the goal of this was for Eugene to teach us about his community, and he turned in this image to the workshop, and I was like, oh, okay, it's cute, there's kids. But when you asked him to tell about his image, actually what it means to him is that This is an area where they all sell drugs. And when they're selling drugs, whenever kids come by, everyone has to put their drugs down. It's like a rule of the street. So this is actually a moment when kids are coming through that they're putting whatever they're selling away in order for the kids to go by, because they don't want the kids to see that. But I just thought that that was something I knew nothing about. It's something that I think is important to know. And it gives me, a new perspective on his neighborhood, honestly. He also sees gentrification in his neighborhood. So, this is an area that is changing rapidly, and you have tourism and all these things coming into these areas that have never had them before. Again, a really straightforward symbol, right? Kind of a flag behind bars. So, for him, it's, this ability to communicate comes really naturally once he learned a few basic steps with how to use the camera properly, etc. This visual communication really is second nature to him. This symbol of, great wealth, and, with this bridge behind, and then someone sleeping wrapped in an American flag. Eugene did this in 1 week. It was, we did a workshop for 3 or 4 days. We're not even talking a week of work. I think I edited 3 or 4 shoots, and this is the type of material he made. And no one was more surprised than Eugene, because I was like, this is incredible, beautiful. And he's, a lot of these kids, they just never been told that they are good at something. Really, it's just that simple. He's like, yeah, right, you're pulling my, I'm like, no, dude, this is blowing my mind. This is beautiful. You're communicating to me in an incredible way right now, and you're just really good at it. So this is Chris. He was another student, an older student, because he just got out from doing 10 years, and he wanted to go back to school. So something that I worked on with my students was, getting on the level of people, the thing is Chris could have shot this image towering over this guy, but what he did was he sat on the ground with him and spoke with him as a human being. And that's why we get this genuine moment, and we're on the ground with him. And that changing of perspective is what is the thing that I really wanted them to do. Not because there's a lot of images of just homeless people, and does that really tell us anything? Does it help us commiserate with anyone? But the difference here is that I ask myself questions about this guy when I see this, but a lot of that has to do with the way that Chris shot it and the way he approached it. And that was just treating this guy like a human being, honestly, and being on the street with him. Again, this is a very troubling, difficult image. This woman was living in this alleyway, and it would be easy to make an exploitative image out of this, but Chris sat there for 30 minutes speaking with her about her story, asking her if she was okay, seeing what he could do to kind of help her out that day, and he captured this genuine moment while he was doing that makes me feel for her as a human being. The other thing is that this, storytelling in general can be a very empowering thing. And, Chris felt that he is someone who was under surveillance his whole life, before he was in jail, while he was in prison, and now that he was out. He felt that he was constantly under surveillance by the police, which he was. This ability to turn around the camera on the police was something that was really scary for Chris, and he's not a guy that gets scared easy. He didn't want to take this picture, and I was with him when he shot this, and I was like, it's okay to take this photograph, and the cop didn't care, but Chris's internal censorship was going on, but after he shot this, he was just he felt so good, and he felt stronger that he could do this and turn the camera around on the cops that were always looking at him. This is an image of someone overdosing in Chris's community, and I do think it's important to show images like this. I also tried to coach these students. It's more important to show an image like this, which is actually the gentleman that was overdosing on opioids, which is something that's just nationwide and common. You could just walk down the street and run into that, which is what happened. This is his friend who's nervous and concerned about him. So thinking about the ripple effect that these stories have, and the stories around the periphery is sometimes more important than just the thing that jumps out at you. And, rewriting the narrative of our communities is really the main thing to take away, I think, and it's what I try to teach to work on with my students is, all of the images out of this neighborhood are ones of violence and negativity, etc. So that image is Chris's family, okay? And the images that always were coming out of that neighborhood are ones of violence. And what Chris did there was, he captured this beautiful moment of people in his neighborhood, his cousins, his aunts, his uncles, in a way that made me see them as human beings, and in a way that made me appreciate his community, not look at it in a negative light, which was kind of the main takeaway from that. I think we will end there. I only had one more picture anyways. But thank you guys, I appreciate it.
Let's take a few minutes for any burning questions. We can probably take 3 or 4.
Go for it.
A question? Oh.
Yeah, how did you get permission from the cops to go around and take photos on those, around on their missions?
With the police?
Yeah, did you have to tell them what capacity were you acting in, ostensibly?
So the very first time I was introduced to the gang squad, I was on assignment for the New York Times. And that was a story about a specific gang that operates in Fresno. But I obviously have a bigger project I'm working on, right? So I kind of, when I find something of interest to me, I make sure to keep relationships in those places. So I was able to go back to that unit because they liked the coverage they got initially. Now, this is one of the bigger question is like, I still grapple a little bit with some of the ethical ramifications of, like, because I become friends with some of these guys, like some of these cops. I spend night after night with them, and their jobs are very dangerous. And I still want to represent them in a truthful way. Do I feel as much responsibility to them as I do to folks that are disempowered in the community? No, the answer is no, and that's because they're coming from a place of power. Okay, but I do feel an obligation to be as truthful as possible. And I mean, yeah, I have to be a bit of a chameleon when I'm working with these guys. It's not like I'm sitting there telling them like, oh, like, this is bullshit how you're sweeping these communities, like, and traumatizing children. Like, if I said that, I wouldn't be able to work there for very long, right? But I mean, but I do find areas of agreement that we do have. And I try to focus on those. The cops are humans too, and one of the things that comes through, the majority of them realize that the system is bullshit. Like they're just like, I'm incentivized to do bad shit, and it doesn't work. And they'll tell you that shit off the record. Excuse my language now. All of a sudden, apologies. But that's a fact. Like, they know, people in the criminal justice system that work in that system know better than any of us how messed up it is, right? But they're also kind of powerless in this system. That's how I got the initial access and kind of kept working with them.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
Hi, thank you for your presentation and also for coming to Kennedy King College. I remember.
Thank you.
Did a similar presentation. You talked about the contraband. The juvenile would get, they needed to be searched every time they went out. But how did they get contraband? That was kind of bizarre.
Right. So when they go out and work, so the majority of the work that they do is road work, right? So it's kind of interesting. People throw them contraband while they're doing road work. So cigarettes, cell phones. It's like people that probably have been locked up themselves, and they're like, "Here you go, homie. You need some ciggies." And stuff comes flying out the windows of cars. Yeah, that's how they get most of it. Mm-hmm.
Another question or two?
This presentation that you did, is that on the Pulitzer website or somewhere?
For some of it, it's not. Okay. Yeah, so the student work is, I'm still working on some of this. So it's not like, it's not in a final iteration yet, honestly. There are chapters of this work that can be found. For instance, the Inmate firefighters story was published on the Marshall Project. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Marshall Project. They do criminal justice work, journalism organization, and they published some of that. So the Marshall Project is one place to see some of it, and then California Sunday Magazine, which is a magazine out west that it's one of my favorite publications. They ran some follow-up work with some of these kids as they got out, and we did audio with them. And so you can find, if you look up California Sunday Magazine and you look up, I think it's called maybe Coming Home from Prison. If you search. So one of the guys that we talked about that was on the phone, his name is Marcus Tapia. If you really want to find the story, just punch in California Sunday Marcus Tapia. You'll find it. And we did audio with those guys, which I like to show in classrooms because the audio element helps bring another layer to it, and it's audio and images. But yeah.
And then just another quick question. Your presentation was really good with humanizing and just showing how really bankrupt the whole system is. But can you share with us any of your political thoughts? People who are writing about mass incarceration, Angela Davis, Michelle Alexander, and others, talk about, modern day slavery. And just wondering what you're thinking.
Well, so actually, I mean, this is one of the very few areas that I'm optimistic about right now, believe it or not. I feel like it's a pretty dark time politically in our nation. It's very depressing and it's easy to get weighed down by things. But we're in this really interesting shift where people are willing to have these conversations about criminal justice reform. It's kind of incredible to me that it took someone like Trump in order to make that happen in a very strange way. It was almost like if Obama had come out and said that, or someone from the left of the political spectrum had said that, he would have been seen as weak, you know what I mean? But for right now, I mean, I'm still working pretty heavily in prisons. I just left a women's prison in San Diego where they are really doing incredible stuff. But not only that, people are very open about it. So a lot of these folks that work in these places that really, that know more about criminal justice than anyone, they have progressive-minded ideas, but they would have kept them to themselves a couple years ago. And right now, the climate is such that people are being open about, this system isn't working. The way we're locking people up, isn't working. And I'm very surprised. It's a totally different political climate in criminal justice work currently. And hopefully it stays that way and changes actually happen.
Thank you so much. A round of applause for our final speaker. Thank you so much, Brian.